I'm Asha Doré with Parley Lit's Totally Biased Reviews, talking with Jane Wong about her memoir, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, out a year ago from Tin House. Your book is so exciting to me because even though our lives are like completely different, older millennials.
Yeah, the elder millennial vibe, there's something about like, I don't know, thinking about all these like TV shows and serials and the mall.
Yeah. Yeah. The mall.
What happened to the mall?
I know. It's so funny. I went back to my hometown in April, which was the first time I'd been back there since right before the pandemic. And I went to the mall for the first time in maybe 15, 20 years.
Wow.
And it was like so nice. And this is like a shitty little panhandle town, you know, and like I was stunned. There's like a sushi restaurant and like a acai bowl place.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, what is like I don't know how to deal with the fact that the mall is like cool there.
Wow, yeah, no, I still feel like I still have Jamba Juice and Spencer's Gifts or something.
That's right, and like Hot Topic, Aunt Annie's, and the arcade. Your book has been out for a year now, a year and a couple months. That's exciting. So how has it been, like, just to have, it's your first memoir, right?
Yes.
Out with Tin House for a year.
Yeah, it's been out for, about a year and change, and it's been a whirlwind, to be honest. I had 2 books of poetry before this, and I think the fact that this is a memoir, the reception was wildly different. Like, first of all, it's like obviously so much more vulnerable, and like you actually have to share tangible details about your life instead of hiding behind a metaphor, which is what I did before. And so it's been really emotional, I think, to kind of talk to people who've read the book in ways that feel like, I don't know, less lonely. I think a lot of people reach out and they're like, oh, even though we have, totally different lives, this particular moment really stayed with me and I had a similar experience, and I couldn't have expected that, I think. So it's been really beautiful. And the fact that it's out in paperback, too, feels really special to me. I met so many amazing people kind of all over the U.S., and so it's been special. But also, like, I don't know if I can do another memoir. I mean, I know that sounds, like, dramatic, but there's a part of me that's like, oh, it's so much of yourself, like, not just on the page, but, like, meeting people and talking to people about their own experiences of, say, estrangement with a family member, or, intimate partner violence, or racism, or, like, messed up, like, teachers who, like, whatever, didn't think that you could be a writer, like, all that kind of stuff. It's, like, kind of amazing. Mothers, like, people share a lot about their moms with me. It's been beautiful, emotional, and surprising, too. Like, some people are, like, I don't know, it's almost like they know me, and I'm like, well, you kind of do. It's like, it's weird, because, like, you don't and you do, because I think I just put it all out there, because I wasn't sure if I would write another one, basically. Right. It's also interesting because I think we do think about what we choose to include and occlude, too, but then when it's out there, I totally almost forget that I wrote it, to be honest. I had those moments where I think that's different. Creative nonfiction to me feels very different than poetry in that way. Whereas, like, I almost like forgot that I made this thing exist, so I don't know what some of the details people know about me or don't. I'm like, wait, how do you know that? They're like, well, we read about it, and I was like, oh,
yeah, exactly.
So I don't know. Maybe there's a little dissociation with CNF, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I also think it's just like that thing of us like remaking our memories. It's like we put it on the page and we make it into a thing, but then a year later we've remembered it differently, and then somebody's like addressing the old memory, and it's like,
yes, that's
where'd
true.
You get that?
I like that. I really love the idea of like remaking memory, or that as you grow and evolve as a person, and in many ways heal in different ways and create new new relationships with memories, that it's no longer that. It's not stable. Memory is not something that's static.
Yeah.
Though when you write it down, it sometimes feels like it. It's almost like a time capsule. Like this memoir, reading this maybe 20 years from now, like, looking back at my life, I would be like, whoa, it really was a time capsule of me on the precipice of turning 40. It's like a very distinct moment in time where I'm neither kind of like towards the other half of my life, but I'm not also 20, so it's a weird time, you know. Speaking of elder millennial spaces, but
yeah, right. I'm turning 40 soon too.
Yeah. When's your birthday?
In March.
Okay, mine's in October, so I'm turning 40 soon.
yeah, really
it's
soon.
happening.
Yeah,
it's happening.
It's weird. Like I didn't feel weird about 30, but 40 has done something to my brain. Like I'm just like, what does that mean? That means something. I think that like our generation was told that was like the over the hill age or something, right? Which what the hell does that mean?
It feels like the beginning, to be honest. For me, I feel the most sure of myself, the most like viscerally like alive, meaning back pain reminds me that I'm alive. Like you know, that too, my body is here, like I feel it. And yeah, there is a level of confidence that feels really special about this time of life.
Yeah, it's so true. It's like it doesn't feel older, it feels but I wouldn't want to be younger.
No.
At all. Like
me neither.
If I like my husband loves the idea of like his 20s. I'm like, I would never ever go back ever. Misery. Like,
right. And especially when you're writing essays or nonfiction, like writing this memoir, to revisit different selves, like these are all still Janes to me, but it's not the current me. Though when I was writing this book, I tried my best to write up to the present, to kind of push back against the idea of memoir being only the past. And what could a memoir that has like a past, present, and a future, like there's some speculative elements to the memoir, and for me that was to almost like speak to myself like 15-20 years from now and say like what has changed, what has stayed the same, you know. And so I don't know, but I'm grateful for my younger past selves. In many ways, someone asked me a question once that was like, who's your most, like, your ideal audience for this book? And I was like, oh, it's like me, but like me at like, you know, 19, me at, 23, like trying to figure out the different parts of myself that needed that voice coming from afar later in time. Anyway, time is weird. It's not linear, obviously, in my brain.
No, totally. And I love so much of what you're saying. I really like what you're saying about the time capsule. I think that's so cool because it like contains the vulnerability that I think people want from memoir, but also protects you in a way, because it's like, well, it's like, this is my life as I told it then. So it's not my life, it's a story. Right? It's like that story.
It's a story, and a lot of like older folks will say to me, oh, you're way too young to have written a memoir. And I find that such a funny comment, because I'm like, well, one, you can have so much experience regardless of your age. You could be like 10 and have so much experience, right? It's relative. Also, it's like, I'm not a single being. Like, this is also my mother's story. This is my like brother's story, my grandmother's, my father's, the shitty ex-boyfriends that show up in there. Like, it's not just me. And so it's weird to think about, like, what does it mean to be too young to write a memoir? I don't know how to respond to that comment. I just laugh and shrug and just feel like, it's more, life is more than just, whatever, how many years you've lived on this earth. I get to be lucky to live a long time in this, like, realm, right? That, there's so many books within me that it's a matter of deciding when and how you want to share the stories that you have in you. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, and I feel like so many people write memoirs and publish them when they're like 20.
Yeah. Yes.
Or like they do like auto-fiction or series that are kind of similar to their lives, #girls.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's like, every time in one's life that kind of like, again, like time capsule element is special. Otherwise, it's fleeting to me. It's a kind of archive. There is a kind of obsession I think I have with trying to understand the wisdom of my younger self too. Like there's, in the memoir, there's that one chapter, the Bad Bildungsroman with table tennis, where I'm like obsessed with this like teenage version of myself that's so radically like does not give any fucks, about spilling whatever. I wish I had that I don't care attitude sometimes at work. Like I want to harness my teenage self sometimes, and I think that there is something I really want to get back to, I think. Because being also younger, especially as a child, there is so much imagination and play and goofiness and silliness that I think I want to imbue in my like adult life all the time. Like I love to play, and I think that so much of like being an adult or adulting is like trying to take that away, you know?
Yeah, I was really excited to meet you because I'm an artist too, and you've had like visual art showings in Seattle, and I was like learn about your other art too. You know, on Dexter when he like recognizes other serial killers. I feel like they're like multi-genre artists. We like recognize each other.
Yeah, the weirdos, the people who like can't stay in one like spot and have to like almost like it's kind of like a I don't know, translation, like over and over and over again.
Yeah, it is. That is a really good way to put it. And I'm like, so I want to hear about your art, but I feel like that's like the location of play for me is just not being stuck in one form, or stuck is maybe the wrong word, but just like having the interest in moving through different genres. And I feel like it just brings out the playfulness.
Yes.
So yeah, I want to hear about your art too.
I think playfulness, as you're saying, I love that there's something about cardboard that reminds me of childhood. Like you literally don't need much except like boxes and markers and tape and scissors, and I love any time in which like materials feel like they're magical and it can be anything, you know? It's kind of like, you know, kids, like you buy them these like nice toys and they just want to play with the trash can, you know? Exactly. And it's, you know, same thing with like, I guess like pets too. It's so funny. Like I grew up with cats and they're obsessed with like hair ties, even if you buy them these like fancy like whatever catnip mice or whatever type of things. But yeah, like I think for me the thing I really love about like interdisciplinary art or playing with other genres or mediums is really honestly failure. Play is tied to failure. Like sometimes when kids play, when this game doesn't quite, it's not what you planned, you have to almost like pivot, be like, oh well, let's try it this way, you know, and it's often collaborative in your mind, but also with other people. And so for me, I think the biggest thing I learned as I was like trying out different mediums like poetry, sculpture, or ceramics, or you know, like paper arts, or any of that kind of stuff, even the cross genre, so from nonfiction and moving into, you know, now kind of like playing around a little bit with fiction, which is where I actually began. But for me, it's just like, okay, well, I don't know if I'm quote unquote good at this, and that feeling of not being good at something, the fact that I could fail at something that I find deeply beautiful, risky, and like an open portal to your imagination. You know, sometimes describe myself as a recovering perfectionist. I struggle with failure, and so I actually had to throw myself into uncomfortable positions of disciplinary art to force myself to be okay with failure. And I love it. It turns out I'm super into it, and so I don't know what's next. I just know that I'm very moved by certain sounds or textures. It's very sensory to me. I've always been obsessed with like sensory details. If that's anything, that's probably my medium, is like sensory obsession. Because I grew up in a restaurant, and so like if you grow up in a restaurant, like there is only like a hyper awareness of like people are having a conversation here, you can hear the fryer over here, you can like see that cockroach run across the like kitchen floor, there's this, you know, the smell of like oil. It's just like, it's so synesthesia infused. And to me that's like playing with different art forms. Like,
I think that's so true, and I love what you said about like collaborative failure. I think that's really smart. Like I sometimes teach ESL at night, and I tell my students like the only way you can actually learn language is to fuck up a lot.
Yes,
you know?
exactly.
And I just feel like that whole cliche of like, you know, you have to fail to learn is really, really true. Like, you get stressed out or creative or excited or whatever when you fail. So then that pivoting that you're talking about is so important. And I, you know, one of the things that I noticed in your book is, you know, of course, all the descriptions of food, which are like so sensory. There's so many sensory things, and also how that moves into like gardening later. I think that's like such a nice progression.
Yeah, it is the central core, I think, to everything I do, is like the idea of nourishment or food, or I think that the sensory obsession over the sound, smell, taste, care, like almost grotesquerie of it too. I think that it's so funny. Once I was like going to this conference or this like literary festival, and someone had said that my work was not as delectable as they thought it might be, and I was like, what does that mean? Like, when we think food delicious, we think of things that are pretty, right? But I mean, I write about the slop and the like rot and the stink and locking my brother in the meat freezer at the restaurant. Like, all that too is food, and I find that delectable too. Like I've been obsessed with always like rotting things and fish sauce and the things that are pungent and that we don't want to look at all the time, like the things that scare us, in terms of what that food can be so I don't know, cleansed, right? Like when we go to the grocery store or whatever it is, right? And we don't actually see the physical dirt, right? In like the farmer's hands. Like my mom, she grew up in the countryside, and so she has farmer hands, and so she's like, you should get in the dirt, like you should get, the worms should be there, right? And then we go to the grocery store, and oftentimes it's so like sanitized and pre-washed and packaged, and it just almost feels like for me at least, I've lost that like connection, I think, to physical viscera, including like, if you eat animals, right? Like, it's like if you haven't seen anyone like kill a chicken, it's intense, and I was really moved. Like I just cried when I saw it. It was just intense. It was deeply violent, and I was like, oh, but it's also like deeply, like this is gonna feed this amount of people, in my mother's village. And so anyway, but yeah, I'm obsessed. I've always been obsessed with food, and it's so funny because I'm just learning to cook right now, so it's like I've always been fed, but I never really dove into like cooking for myself, and I find there's a lot of pressure, I think, because I want to get my mom's recipe just to taste like hers, but I have to remember that it's her hands that make the food. It's not the recipe, and so I've got to make it my own. Yeah. Right? I've got my own hands, and they're different from hers. We joke around. She always loves when I have rings on right now, and she's always like, oh, like I wish I could wear rings, because her fingers are just like double the size as mine, because she worked in a restaurant and a farmer, and she's a postal worker, and she sorts mail, and so she's just like, oh, we look exactly the same except for our hands. And it's so true. It's so funny.
That is funny.
Yeah.
And it really seems to be connected to that like nonlinear time thing, like that life cycle kind of repeating itself over and over again.
Yes.
With, like, the dirt and the food and the destruction and like, the way our bodies are destroyed over and over.
Totally. That which produces life is also produces death. Like, it's this constant system, and I kind of grew up in this way where that was always like, I was always aware of that, like deeply so. And to, even when you, like, it's so funny because like my mom composts. She doesn't know that word really. It's just, but it's like, that's what you do. And it was like hip, like for a moment it was just like, oh, like composting bins and this and that. My mom's like, I don't know what that is, but I just throw it in my garden. Like,
I totally get that. I worked in restaurants from when I was like 14 until I guess I was like 22 or something. Wow. And I started working in a Japanese restaurant, and like I learned how to cook there. And it was like just this really interesting experience, because I remember having like a similar thing where I was like, wow, like this is like gross, but now I really want to eat this food because I understand like the mechanisms behind how it is made, and just like all the like the shrimp pieces and the everything everywhere, and the smells, and when things go bad and you have to deal with that, and like the dumpster outside,
right, exactly,
and all the things it attracts, and how you have to like package things so that like rodents don't get inside.
Right, totally.
This was like in Florida, so
many creatures.
And just the way that like animals that you wouldn't expect will come in and eat any kind of rotting flesh. Yes. Really adorable animals.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. It's kind of shocking. And I love those animals too. I feel like maybe more so than the memoir, but in my poetry, like all those, I also write a lot about those animals, the creatures that feast upon the rot, or the creatures that people find like as pests. Obviously rats, for instance. I'm obsessed with rats. You know, I was born the year of the rat, so I feel like a deep kinship to rats, you know, and I'm not scared that people get so scared of rats, and I'm just like, no, they're just there. I'm just, maybe, I grew up in a restaurant. It's like you get used to seeing these, like, creatures. They're just like any other creature. They're just trying to survive, you know? Yeah, recording the audiobook I didn't realize how intense it was going to be. I think it was like 5 days. Basically in like a 9 to 5, like in a little box. When I was given the audition tapes for it, the other, you know, professional readers, like actors, it just didn't sound right. Like, it just is weird, but it's hard to, you know, and I don't think that they could find anyone who could speak Toisanese or Cantonese, and like, if I'm going to like fail at speaking my own language, that's gonna be me on me, you know, like, you know, rather than someone else. So it was a last minute decision for me to actually read it, but I did it, and I was like, it was like, okay, like a 4-day turnaround between like getting me into that studio. But I was really glad I did, and it was emotional, I think, like also intensely emotional to read it out loud from beginning to end, and I don't think I've ever done that before. So I read out loud when I write, but not to this degree, obviously.
Yeah, that's like as a job. It's a really interesting process.
Yeah.
I kind of want to steal that process and just do it.
Yeah.
My book.
Yeah, actually, you know, I think one bit of advice I think that, you know, I have done in all 3 books of mine is that, like, after you finish writing a full draft of your book, and especially before it gets picked up or, you know, goes through the whole publishing process, which is a total another, you know, part of your brain that has to be activated into copy editing, etc. It's just to like take an entire day and like read your own book, like, because it's gonna be before it's not yours anymore. I know that sounds dramatic, but I think once it's out in the public, you don't hold on to it the way you used to. And so I always do that. So I did do that with my book, but I didn't read it out loud. I just read it from beginning to end, and I was like, oh, it's done. Which is wild. I wanted just to be like my regular voice, you know? And it's so funny too, because I usually, when I do read poetry, like when I perform it, I'm always standing like on tiptoe, and so it was weird actually for me to read the book sitting in a room. So I actually had to, like, as I was sitting, I still put my like toes down the ground and like put my heels up. It was very odd, but I had to do it the whole time, because that's the only way I can read with like intention rather than like just sounding like truly like I'm just having a conversation with somebody. So I was like, I had like, was it like calf pain because I was just tensing, you know, my feet, and it's just like, but that's how I usually read.
And I wanted to know like what your thoughts are about the publishing process, like, because you've published a couple of poetry books, and Tin House is such a great publisher. Like, I don't know how much you want to share about like whether you had an agent or how you submitted or any of that stuff.
Right. Yes, yeah. Tin House has been amazing, and I knew that they were going to be the right press for this particular memoir, because it is a little non-linear, a little poetic, a little less commercial, I guess. I don't know what else to say about that part, but I think that they really let me be as playful as possible, while also staying very, very like strong in terms of deadlines, copy edits, fact checking, all that kind of stuff, legal team, all that kind of stuff. They were great, and the publicity team was amazing as well. I think for me, that whole process of even getting this book into someone's hands was like dramatic, as is this like
amazing
sounds
siren
of the city, picking up in the audio. It's great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, we're in Seattle.
That's right.
It's great to not do this on Zoom.
It is actually really nice.
Yeah, right? And yeah, I had an agent actually, and we just had a different vision for the book, and basically I kind of had to let this agent go, and Tin House reached out to me for a book of poetry, and so I didn't have another book of poetry on hand, and so like I was like, oh, I've been working on this essay collection. It was an essay collection at the time for like, 5 years. And so I sent that along and they were like really interested. And so I did actually sell this book without an agent,
Nice.
which is, yeah, it is. But at the same time, it's also hard, right? Because it's like I didn't get to necessarily move it around to other places.
Yeah.
That said, I knew Tin House from the beginning was going to be the right press anyway. So it felt like almost kismet in some ways. It was a very strenuous publishing process compared to my books of poetry because there were so many elements of like fact checking, copy editing, permissions, all of that, where in poetry there is some of that in poetry, but not to the degree in which you're publishing something that's like nonfiction. You have to make sure everything is like, cross your T's, dot your I's. And so I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't know that it was going to be that strenuous, but I'm so glad that I went through it, and obviously the book's stronger as a result.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother part of your like brain and approach to writing. I definitely think that you almost have to like make a switch, right, in terms of like how you see the book at that point, because it's no longer this kind of thing that is like an amorphous blob that you've been working on for like 5 to 7 years. Now it's like this thing that really needs to get polished, I guess, without losing some of its, I guess, like raw charm, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Art.
yeah, but it was, it's so funny. I'm grateful so much to Tin House and the team there, and my editor, Elizabeth, was amazing. And now it just feels kind of like, now it's out in the world, I'm just like, oh, what's next,
So it started as an essay collection. I'm really interested in that because I do feel like it reads as a book, as a memoir, but I also, noticed that you do the thing that one of like my favorite craft things is like lists and how-to guides, like moving to the second person and all that stuff. And I feel like the way that worked for me as a reader in the beginning was just to kind of orient me to the sort of world of the book and like the life of the speaker, in a way that was really inviting. That was really interesting, and I don't think there were as many how-to type things later on in the book. So it was really nice, similar to like the food thing. It's like we start off with like being given like the plate of food, and then later we move into planting and gardening and stuff like that. Yeah, I just wanted to know if you wanted to speak to the craft or even transforming it from an essay collection to a book.
It's like I really did envision this as an essay collection. I began, I think, even writing the chapters individually as essays in a different order, and when I was working with Tin House, they were like, oh, we really want to push you to think of this as a memoir. And as a result of that, I really had to think like, okay, what is the through line here? Or like, how am I going to keep this non-linear, keep this essay-ish, but also still have the threads, and that way I don't feel like I'm like repeating myself, or I feel like it feels like there's an order and a progression, but also that each chapter has its own craft, like vessel form, like the Object of Love, which is right in the middle of the collection, has these like little short subtitles in them, and the other chapters don't have that, right? So almost like each chapter has its own little thing, like the how-to with the cheat sheet for restaurant babies. That one felt like it needed to be in that particular style, but then later there's like a different style. To me, that like some people may say like, oh, that's not super cohesive, or that's not like, but I'm like at the same time like, well, I mean, it is essays. Like I still think of it that way, it's like, but chapters, same. It's like you could think of it as like memoir in essays. You can. People are kind of obsessed for some reason with like categories and definitions and what they expect this to be, and I'm just like, well, why is that important to you? Like, what is important to me is like, this is just storytelling, and what type of like storyteller doesn't go back and forth and move into other tangents and then return back to link it. I mean, that's the whole joy of storytelling, is like the fact that it sends you to other connected stories and links back, right? So but it was fun. I think that the craft of writing creative nonfiction was such a joy for me. I think that the biggest thing I learned, especially as I was writing, was as I would go on kind of more poetic moments of in scene writing. I loved writing in scene, but I also had to add a lot more reflection than I'm used to, because in poetry we really try not to explain or talk about in a way so that it's not giving the reader the opportunity to intuit that themselves. And I think in nonfiction I really need to give more reflection, more vulnerability than I'm used to. And so that to me was like something I really learned as I was writing the book, and something now that I really value, especially as a teacher, as a professor. I always ask that of my students now, because like I had to do it, so might as well try to see where you can go if you just add a bit more. I'm a maximalist, so I always want more, right? And memoir is really kind of like really kind of difficult decisions as to what you're picking and choosing out of so many moments in your life, right? And so like, what is it about this particular moment that shows us something, right? And shows you something, and then you have to ask yourself that deep question of like, why does that matter to me? Why did I remember that, not that this other thing? And so that does have to, it takes some time to write through it.
I think that's true. And it's interesting because it's like, it's not therapy,
right?
But
exactly.
it does take like a lot of therapy to get there, like reflection and processing or whatever. Like, it's, whenever I'm teaching classes, I'm really trying to parse out like what should stay on the page, just like not the therapy. It's where you got to.
Right, exactly.
Like, just cut all that, the process out. Which is a hard thing, I think, especially for like new writers. It's one of the hardest things.
Oh, it definitely is. And trying to figure out like what is the central heart space or the core of what you're trying to articulate. And that takes a lot of revision. It does. Revision is both something that I love and also like hate at the same time. I mean, I think it's one of those always push and pull relationships I have with, like, what does it mean to over revise, or what does it mean to push yourself and write the ending after the ending, right? I keep coming back to like my younger self, and I'm the first in my family to go to college and even to graduate traditional high school, and no one could have told me, I think, as a young person, that I would have 3 books in the world. Like, that would have been unfathomable to me. Like, it's just like, wait, what? And I think I talk a lot in the memoir about being a writer and some of the challenges I had, like with like both really wonderful mentors, teachers as I was growing up, but also like people who like really did not believe in my worth, I think, as a writer and maker. And I think that the combination of both those experiences, like I think as a professor myself, like have to remind like my students always that like go to the shelf in the bookstore and make space for where your name would be, because like it's honestly like still shocking to me that I have like books out in the world and people read them. It's incredible, because you kind of do this stuff on your own and no one's forcing me to write this, and so I'm just like, wow. And so I try to keep that like beginner's minds with me all the time I make anything, going back to play and going back to failure, that whatever I'm going to be making next, like I still have that like shock of like, wait, what? Like I could write a book? What? I think people maybe assume that writers like are just like, I don't know, more confident than they are, but there is always a little bit of fear, and I think that fear of like, can I do this again, is exactly where we need to be, because it causes a lot of like curiosity and risk taking.
Hi, this is Jane Wong reading from my memoir, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City. And I'll be reading from Chapter 3, A Cheat Sheet for Restaurant Babies. How to lob an egg into a parking lot. Wait until it's dark, settled in dark, not sunset dark, say 9 p.m. The sound of breaking is better when you can't see it happening. When your father isn't looking, go to the fridge and steal 2 eggs from the bottom of the carton stack and wrap them up in a small towel, folding the towel like you would an origami cup. Sneak out through the back of the restaurant, mind the potholes, and circle around front to the parking lot. Unfold the towel and give your little brother 1 egg. When he says the egg is too cold and it smells rotten like unbrushed teeth, tell him to shut up. Ground your heels into the gravel as you imagine baseball pitchers do to gain traction. Give all your anger over to the egg. Breathe your hot breath on it. Hold it up to the sky like an offering, a sacrifice, this careful thing that could have grown into something else. Tell your brother there is nothing to be afraid of. Tell him to stop shaking. He is no incubator. With your arm bent back at 45 degrees, hurl the egg high into the air, into an arch any city would welcome as a bridge. Hurl the egg and do not think about anything, not about how your father sloshes an aquarium of whiskey, not about the growing piles of bills we will translate later. You must give the egg all of it. You can open your eyes or close them, it won't matter since you won't see it land. But you will hear it. You will hear your brother squeal like a pig at mealtime. You will hear the splat, the crepuscular glob of the yolk spreading across the hood of a car. Poor car, you'll think. Poor, stupid car.